Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in person and virtually. My name is Fadi Qafaiti, and I'm the new Executive Director here at the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center. Before we begin, I wish to thank the Jerusalem Fund's Board of Directors for placing their faith in me with this event, especially Dr. Subhi Ali, Eid Mustafa, and Muhayya Khilfe, who are joining us today virtually, and also extend my warmest appreciation to our three beloved panelists and dear guests today who are able to make this event on such short notice. As honored as I am to be speaking to you before you today to introduce these panelists for our talk, Ceasefire in Gaza, Challenges and Struggles Ahead, it is with a very heavy and shattered heart that I do so. For 15 months, we've been watching with horror and disbelief as a live-stream genocide unfolded before our very eyes. For 470 plus days, we have been presented with documented evidence non-stop of Palestinians being relentlessly killed in every which way imaginable. Entire families have been wiped off the registry. Hospitals, mosques, churches, schools, cultural centers, shelters, residential buildings, markets, bakeries, and so-called humanitarian safe zones have all been targeted and bombarded with the most advanced and destructive weapons out there. Aid workers, medical practitioners, rescue and response teams, journalists, men, women, and children have all been targeted without remorse. These lost souls have been failed by the international community who refused to take a stance and protect their lives at the hands of a brutal colonial power. This ceasefire deal came 15 months too late. On October 8th, Hamas informed Israel that they would lay down their arms and return all the captives taken the day before in exchange for Israel not invading Gaza. Instead, Israel refused and embarked on the most vicious of all of its previous brutal wars on Gaza. It undertook a genocidal campaign of extermination. Through its death machines, land, air, and sea, Israel displaced more than 2 million of the 2.3 million inhabitants, transforming one of the world's most densely populated areas into graveyards of dust and rubble. They wreaked havoc across the region in their failed ground invasion of southern Lebanon and relentless bombardment across the country, killing thousands and wounding many thousands over. Bombarded Syria nearly once a week before invading by land in December 2024, completely depleting its military capacity and occupying more than 40% of the country's already scarce and precious water resources, and even violated international law as they targeted Yemen's crippled infrastructural system, committing numerous international acts of terror through political assassinations across the region. Just moments after the ceasefire agreement was announced, 4 days before it took effect last Sunday, Qatari Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdurrahman Al Thani informed the world that this current ceasefire agreement is nearly identical to the one of many efforts that Israel repeatedly rejected back in May 27, 2024. And he even went as far as stating that the current deal could have been reached in December 2023 had Israel not engaged in a deliberate tactics of delaying and stalling as it continued its genocidal campaign. The aims and intentions were clear from the start. Israel's war was geared towards maximalist death and destruction, deliberately rendering the resumption of life for those who survived impossible, i.e., a textbook definition of genocide. As of today, official reports from a depleted Palestinian health ministry place the casualty figures at least 47,283 killed and over 111,000 injured, though we must note that many respected medical journals like The Lancet have reported several months ago that these numbers are as high as 186,000, so we know the number is much, much larger. Of course, and over 70% are women and children. Unfortunately and tragically, these numbers will continue to rise as more and more bodies and remains are uncovered from the rubble, and others will tragically succumb to their wounds and illnesses that could have otherwise been very easily treated and prevented with functioning healthcare infrastructure and adequate supplies that Israel has destroyed over 18 years of besiegement. I must also stress that while the killings have temporarily stopped for the time being under the first phase of the ceasefire agreement, the genocide in Gaza has not ended. Under the 1948 Convention of the Prevention of Genocide, The acts committed during Israel's colonial war on Gaza, namely Article 2, Sections B, quote, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Article C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, all continue to render the genocide an ongoing part of everyday life for Palestinians in Gaza. I also want to stand here before you and note that the people that we lost here are not mere abstract statistics and figures that lose all meaning when read in reports and documents like these. These people represent stolen dreams, broken and severed families, unfulfilled potential, lost talent, and beloved souls that were valued by all those they were dear to. Despite the magnitude of the material and infrastructural losses, we Palestinians always say, "Nirja na'ammirha," we'll rebuild again. But the lives that were brutally and mercilessly taken from us in the most painful ways imaginable cannot be returned. Their memories live in all of us, and their losses are eternal. With over half of Gaza's population being children under the age of 18, over 1 million Palestinians in Gaza have only known a life ruined by siege, terror, suffering, and perpetual cycles of war during their short time on this planet. To illustrate this, I recite a very short poem on the impact of losing children in Gaza and what it means for the family, friends, and beloved. يا أطفال غزة الأشقياء، يا من أزعجتوني بالاستمرار بصراخكم تحت نافذتي، يا من ملأتم كل صباح بالفوضى والإزعاج، يا من كسرتم مزهرتي وسرقتم زهرتي الوحيدة من شرفتي، عودوا واصرخوا كما تشاءون، عودوا واكسروا كل المزهرايات واسرقوا كل الزهور، عودوا فقط عودوا. O rascal children of Gaza, you who constantly disturb me with your screams under my window, you who filled every morning with Russian chaos, you who broke my vase and stole the lonely flower on my balcony, come back and scream as you want, and break all the vases, steal all the flowers. Come back, just come back. Now, those who are familiar with Khalid Jum'a's poem, All Rascal Children of Gaza, will know that this ode to the lost souls was not written during this genocide, nor was it written during the previous war of 2021. It was penned this heartbreaking poem was penned after the devastating war in Gaza in 2014. And I chose to read one written 11 years ago because it resounds just as significantly today. It could have been written yesterday and bear the same crushing effect on our souls. عودوا فقط عودوا. Come back, just come back. Even after the first phase of the ceasefire took effect on Sunday the 19th, Israel has continued to kill people in Gaza. Yesterday, sniping dead a child riding a donkey in Rafah and shooting at those attempting to rescue him. The ceasefire violations were to be expected, given the sheer number of times Israel broke the ongoing ceasefire agreement in Lebanon. Displaced and homeless families across the besieged strip continue to struggle to survive in their tents and shelters as they desperately await the much-needed aid and permission from colonial authorities to return to their homes in the second and third stages, most of which lay in ruins. To discuss what the ceasefire in Gaza means for the future of Palestine and to contextualize the struggles and challenges ahead within a broader scope, we're graced today to have three incredible speakers before us. To start the panel, I'd like to introduce Hani Almadhoun, who'll be providing a report from the ground on life during the ceasefire, as well as discussions on the struggles Palestinians continue to face and that of his family's efforts to alleviate the suffering through their Gaza Soup Kitchen, who have touched the hearts of all those who have seen and followed his family's relentless attempts to prevent an engineered campaign of mass starvation in Gaza. Hani Almadhoun is a senior director of philanthropy at UNRWA USA, a US-based charity group supporting Palestinian refugees. Previously, he held leadership roles at ANERA and Muslim Advocates, contributing to advocacy and humanitarian efforts for marginalized communities. Born to a family of educators, Hani's father taught at an UNRWA school, and a scholarship from the LDS Church enabled Hani to earn a master's in public administration and a bachelor's in international studies from Brigham Young University. Based in DC, he's advocated for civil causes and civil rights, social justice, and humanitarian aid for vulnerable communities in the Middle East. Last year, Hani advocated for Gaza in high-level meetings at the White House and Congress and wrote op-eds for CNN, The Nation, and the LA Times. He co-founded the Gaza Soup Kitchen with his dear and beloved brother Mahmoud to directly support families in Gaza affected by the ongoing crisis. Now, before we begin, I wish to note that all of these speakers today are very dear to our hearts at the Jerusalem Fund and are part of our family, though Hani has a special place because he used to be one of our team back in the day. It was 2008 to 12, I believe. 13. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Hani on.
Thank you. I wish my wife came here. She would have some more respect for me. But her dad is here, so we're good. All right, so thank you guys for coming out. I love being back at the Jerusalem Fund. The board are amazing. They're, everywhere I go in my jobs, I swear I see a donation from the same board member, Dr. Eid Mustafa, Dr. Subhayari, and Dr. Mahaya. So wherever I go, I always see their generosity, and I've interacted with so many of you, and I appreciate this. First, before I start, I want to recognize my father-in-law, who's a genocide survivor and who just got out of Gaza about a year ago. And we're lucky to have him. He's visiting the US. So thank you for being here. Two, speaking of BYU, I have a fortune of telling you guys about the new book, The No Way But Forward, written by Professor Brian Barber, a good friend. Nobody has really looked at Gaza for as long. Few people have looked at Gaza as long as Dr. Brian Barber. And he just published a new book about three Palestinian families he's been talking to for about 30 years. And, Gaza is trending, but, this is really a good book to learn about. And I'm sure there's going to be future engagement around this book. And thank you, Brian, for writing this tale and for helping me come to the US. Well, October 7th, we're there. I wake up early on Saturday, and then I call my team and say, hey guys, this is going to be crazy. We have to organize and talk about our work with UNRWA USA. And at the end of the day, we're like, we don't know what to do. The first week, Israel kicks out people from the north and kicks out UNRWA, say, hey, move to the south and all that. I have family in Gaza, in North Gaza. My parents and my siblings refused to evacuate. They chose to stay in North Gaza, and they paid a heavy toll for that. There's many reasons why they chose to stay in North Gaza, but many of whom is like our neighbor just moved to the south and they killed the whole family. So my family said, death is everywhere, we're gonna stay. Later on, they would learn that's, you could ask yourself many questions. So UNRWA is the largest humanitarian actor inside Gaza. I hope everybody in this room is supporting of their efforts. UNRWA is still on the ground responding and doing this. And by the way, the Jerusalem Fund is a big supporter of UNRWA USA work. So continue to do that. There is a lot of misinformation. Millions of dollars are being spent to attack UNRWA and discredit and all that. Despite this, UNRWA is bringing the largest number of tolls inside Gaza. Just in the last 3 days, more than about 3,000 trucks were allowed into Gaza, on average about 750 trucks per day. Remember, the week prior to that, we were begging for 80 trucks. So UNRWA and other UN agencies that are helping, like World Food Program and UNICEF. Here's the thing about UNRWA. UNRWA, everybody leans on UNRWA. It's the backbone of the humanitarian response. With 13,000 staff, everybody hires the fleet and the UNRWA staff to deliver the aid, including the famous polio vaccine. Now, when UNRWA left North Gaza, I'm raising millions of dollars because of the generosity here in America and around the globe. But then my own family was being starved. Around the next month of the genocide in November, but the next day of Thanksgiving, we wake up to the news that my brother Majid and his family were killed in an F-16 bomb that was dropped, destroyed the whole home. And this when it becomes like, oh, this is my brother. We're a year apart. We're siblings. And we were with him just like in the summer. We were fortunate enough to visit Gaza. And that's you, like he was killed, nameless, faceless, nobody knew who he was, just your average Palestinian. And it hurts because, this is, my mom tells me that every morning when I was in Gaza in the summer, I would wake up and just say, okay, mom, I'm gonna go see my brother Majid. And she didn't know, like I would just go and just spend time with him, not knowing that this would be, we were saying goodbye and not knowing that. His boys, Omar, Ali, and Siwar, the basketball player, and Riman were all killed. His wife Safa took the family a whole week to dig them out. Poor Safa, she was buried twice because they could only recover one half, and the next day they got the next half. And those are full-time civilians. Boom. Then 2 weeks later, the Israeli army grabs my brother Mahmoud from the street. Every man in North Gaza was arrested. The famous boxers video, the first one that was shared, that was my brother Mahmoud. I identified him right away, and then we told everybody, and then NPR and ABC investigated because the Israeli press were saying, hey, we've arrested Hamas warriors and fighters, and it's a complete lie. These guys are my neighbors and my friends, and frankly, they were not really like the, for example, my brother Mahmoud would not go anywhere without ordering a taxi. He's not certainly the most physically fit guy, so he's not going to be fighting and going into tunnels and all that. Anyway, the Israeli lie got caught. Within 20 hours, he was released, naked, without his shoes, and then he had to walk and figure out where to get home. They released him. He had to walk 2 miles in the cold. So that's the first time. 2 weeks later, they would come and grab him again from Kamal Adwan Hospital. Everybody knows Kamal Adwan Hospital, the same thing. This time, they gave him a white coat, a white, like, what do you call it? Like the hazmat suit, something like that. Anyway, then a week later, my sister is putting a video online that says, hey, I'm gonna cook bread, and she used animal feed. I still have the video in my social media. She grinded some animal feed and she said she's gonna try. There is no flour. And she said it was so bad, the smell, the cat would not eat it. The rabbits were too good for it. So at the time, a lot of my American friends here were like, Hani, we gotta figure out the hunger situation in North Gaza. Go figure it out. And remember, UNRWA was responding in South Gaza, but they're limited. The Israelis are not allowing food into North Gaza. Genuine worries. They ate for a month about all the pasta, and then what do we do? And then what happened is my brother Mahmoud said, "Hey, I'm gonna." He cooked the first day. He cooked like he found some potatoes. Beit Lahia is the bread basket of Gaza, so there was some things he was able to get, potatoes, and he will make soup. And that was the first day. He fed 120 families. Then he went home, and then the next day, kids showed up to our home asking for food. And he said, okay, let me process this. And the next day he cooked again. What did help us in North Gaza, there was a lot of foraging, Swiss chard, persimmon, a lot of these things that the Gaza cookbook talked about. So this is the items that with the rain, we would get these things. And then one of the most funny purchases was my brother got overgrown zucchinis. These zucchinis were meant to be stuffed really tiny, but because nobody picked them for 2 months, they kept growing, growing. And the Palestinians, when they saw this, they said, the bounty of the land is blessed. And people were like, well, for me, I just wanted people to eat. He cooked, and then people were sending me money in PayPal and Venmo, and I was like, I'm a Palestinian. Somebody's gonna come digging soon about my account. So, and remember, there was no phone lines and there was no banks. So we built this operation without having those two things. That Israel takes offline, they cut the communication, they bombed the banks and took away the ATMs. Then the next day we said, hey, let's take this to GoFundMe because this is, I want to sustain this because this is not going anywhere. And then 2.5 millions later, we're still cooking and cooking in different areas. And for us, this was about helping our neighbors because really the agencies are stopped from delivering there. Every time UNRWA asks for a mission, they get either impeded, they get attacked, and they've killed more than 260 UNRWA staff. And that's the largest. That's sad to say, but it seems that we got desensitized. So we kept doing this despite all the situation in Gaza and all the logistical nightmare. And then fast forward, we opened the school for about 6 weeks. We opened a medical clinic that, when Kamal Adwan Hospital was surrounded, was literally saving lives. These nurses, we've hired, our family hired nurses, and they were saving life in the street, basically doing first aid. And the nurses were doing stuff that some of your doctors here wouldn't be able to do, like minor surgeries and things like that, because this is like an army surgeon. They just go for it and do it. They don't have to go wait for a procedure. And then in October last year, that's when the Israelis came again to Gaza for the third time, to North Gaza. Remember, my family is still in North Gaza. We've lost every single home, Beit Lahia, Mashrua Beit Lahia. One of the homes they bombed with my brother. And then we found my sister's home was still intact. So we sheltered there and then started helping people from that area. And we kept providing food for the Kamal Adwan Hospital, the Indonesian hospital, and Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya. I hope he gets released soon. Such a hero guy, a good friend, and a neighbor. And we miss his leadership. So he's always like, calls my brother Chef Mahmoud, hey, I need this food, I need this, get me food to the, and we would always do this. Blankets, all that's like, imagine like my brother can't read or write, but he's helping solve a lot of those problems because he's an entrepreneur. This really what helped our kitchen. We hired people who own business, do know how to secure and source things and manage people, and it grew. We were feeding about 5,000 people a day with a small operation like that. And it meant a lot because people tell us a lot of people stood in the north because they were getting food. And my brother was delivering water. Now, when this military campaign, the last one in October, when the Israelis kicked out the ambulances, the ambulances came to the school we've built and they slept in the school because, and then when the ambulances come, that's where the journalists come because that's where they hear the news. So that's how it became. Then again, the Israelis kicked everybody out. Some of our family moved west. They're still in North Gaza. They're still in North Gaza, but they moved to the area called the Nasser or Sheikh Radwan. And then Sheikh Mahmoud and his family remained behind, helping. Took Mahmoud Mahmoud spent every dollar he had on the Kamal Adwan Hospital just buying stuff for them. And he said, hey, this is my way to do good. And also I want to make sure, because if I get arrested again, everything I'm going to lose. So he was helping the hospital, literally, Dr. Hussam, hey, I need ground beef. Can you find it in a can? And we will deliver it for him through the ambulances network. Then on November 30th, day before November 30th, the Israeli army killed Dr. Ahmed al-Kahlout, the guy who ran the ICU unit at Kamal Adwan, and he's also a good friend. Before he died, he ran into my brother Mahmoud and asked him for a can of tomato paste. That's his biggest favor. Like he wanted tomato paste, and Mahmoud knew how to get these things. Uh, November 30th, Mahmoud wakes up. We sent a shipment to Kamal Adwan of fresh produce, overpriced, stuff that you buy for $200, we would pay $5,000 for. And we're not afraid to pay it because, hey, patients need this stuff. And we've have the resources because of a lot of people who support the Gaza Soup Kitchen. About 8 a.m., Mahmoud wakes up, goes to tell his wife, Ala, hey, Ala, let me go to the hospital quickly and we'll have breakfast when I come back because he wanted to see if they need other things. He walked outside the house, about, must have been 20 meters, and an Israeli drone was waiting for him and just took him out. And you can imagine a chef being targeted, like not a militant, not a threat, knowing that the Israelis have his phone number. They have my phone number just 2 days before. They were asking. And we gave him the phone number to tell him, hey, this guy is safe. So they killed. There's a lot of stories we can talk about that. And this is Chef Mahmoud. They've murdered the guy in daylight with the father of seven. He just had a baby a month prior. And that's the co-founder of the Gaza Soup Kitchen. And we've talked about it in the media and all that. Not anybody will change anything. And after he was killed, a lot of people in North Gaza got the message, get out of here or you're next. Because they said this guy has written a letter to the editor in the Washington Post, was in NBC and CNN and BBC. He did not get protected with that. So a lot of families left the north of Gaza City area and moved further south. Then comes December, the Israelis move in and demolish every single home in Mashrou' Beit Lahi, every single one, including my sister's home. They bombed the school we built, where exactly we put a sign in Hebrew. We said, do not bomb, this is a school, in Hebrew and in English, and we put the US flag. And even the Israeli progressive press took a picture and said, like, hey, why are you doing this? A new answer. I challenged the IDF. I said, give me one reason why you killed my brother. They're still investigating. So it's painful because he was killed. He suffered a lot for a year and some, and then he was killed. Remember, Majid was killed, nameless and faceless. Mahmoud was at least known, and he killed two of my brothers. Now I have one brother. It's hard because your impulse is like, hey, I don't want to help. I want to disappear. I don't want to help anybody. But just leaning on our Palestinian tradition, we said there is no way for us to stop. So we've increased a lot of our work. But I stopped talking about my brother Muhammad, the only remaining brother. So I hope he's okay now. But we're homeless. They went back after the ceasefire. There is no home. There is nothing, and finding a bathroom, a working bathroom, is a gift from the heavens. So we could go many directions. I just want to leave that, and then we could expand, and I can answer some questions. But I just, it's a lot. Our family is grieving, but just one last thing. North Gaza, today we delivered about 100 food packages, and yesterday we delivered 100 food packages. What we've learned, we did not plan this. We were wanting to help our neighbors because we're from that town. People started telling their friends, hey, come back. There is some water, there is some food. So more families are feeling now confident that they can go back to their homes. We did not plan to do this. This just happened. And aid organizations were hoping that they will get more to the edges of Gaza because people need to go back to their homes. Their homes are destroyed. But at the end, this is about steadfastness. Do we know if this ceasefire gonna last? I don't know. I'm hopeful. We need any glimmer of hope. So I just wanna even fool myself that it's gonna work. Maybe it will work. But with that, I give it back to Fadi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hani, for this powerful and moving testimony. And we, on behalf of everyone at the Jerusalem Fund, we wish to express our deepest condolences to the losses and suffering you've experienced, your family and loved ones in Gaza. Next up, we'll be hearing for reflections from esteemed journalist Max Blumenthal, who'll be giving his analysis of why the ceasefire in Gaza took so long to achieve, as well as offering a projection of where things might go from here. A longtime friend of the Jerusalem Fund as well, Max Blumenthal is the editor-in-chief of the Grayzone and is an award-winning journalist and author of several books, including the best-selling Republican Gomorrah, Goliath, which we did a book launch several years before, The 51-Day War, and The Management of Savagery. He has produced print articles for an array of publications, many video reports, and several documentaries, again, which we've had the pleasure of hosting here, including Killing Gaza. Blumenthal founded the Grayzone in 2015 to shine a light, journalistic light on America's state of perpetual war and its dangerous domestic repercussions. So, once again, please join us in welcoming Max back to the Palestine Center. Thank you, Max.
Thank you. I wanted to just steal Helena's analysis, so I'm kind of nervous, but I think maybe I wasn't sure what to talk about. Maybe it'll be more personal reflections on the last 15 months. It's been very tormenting psychologically, I'm sure, for all of you, and many of you obviously closer to it than I am. Before I get started, though, yeah, Brian Barber's book, I can't wait to read, No Way But Forward. And I blurbed Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters by Helena, and this is, one of the most censored books in America. And I really recommend it. It's one of the handful of really good books that's come out after October 7th, or since October 7th. I wasn't able to produce a book of my own. Wrote one on the 2014 assault on Gaza. I always saw my books kind of as like kids because I was childless at the time, childless member of the laptop class. But soon after my last book, The Management of Savagery, I had a kid, and that really, I wouldn't say it changed my perspective, but it made the impact of what took place in Gaza much more powerful for me, much more searing. And I needed to have some kind of closure to that. And I was able to get closure by confronting one of the authors of this Holocaust of children, Tony Blinken, who offended me. I'm sure offended you all, but particularly offended me when I saw him dress up on Halloween 2023. He dressed his children up, one of his children up as Zelensky, kind of appropriately begging Joe Biden for stuff at the White House Halloween ceremony, begging him for goodies. He got candy instead of weapons and AI technology. But what did he think of all the children that he was simultaneously exterminating, and how would he be held accountable? Because on that same day, Tony Blinken went before the Senate. On that same day, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and was asked, why are you not working for a ceasefire? Because at that point, Israel had already destroyed much of Gaza City, the north of Gaza, and was moving south. And there was slaughter all across the Gaza Strip already at that point. And he claimed that what we're dealing with in Hamas are people who have mutilated families on October 7th in front of their children and then cut. And he referred to a specific incident of Hamas militants cutting children apart while they're after killing their parents in the next room, then having lunch in the dining room. And this was a fake hoax story cooked up by Yossi Landau from the ultra-Orthodox quote unquote rescue organization, Zaka, which was then spun out by Netanyahu's office in the US media in order to create space for Israel to be able to commit genocide, to be able to target civilians, to be able to kill chefs and aid workers. And Blinken lied in order to prevent a ceasefire. And then in the next breath, he said, Israel needs to be able to do more to attack Hamas in other words, to prevent October 7th from happening again. Prior to that, on October 12th, I went to the State Department briefing room for the first time. My colleague Liam Cosgrove, who made some really important interventions there, told me how to get in and what to do. And I went in there and I saw Sam Husseini sitting there. This is 5 days after October 7th. Israel was they destroyed the Rimal neighborhood, which I knew so well in Gaza City. They destroyed my friend and journalistic colleague, Shadi Abdul Rahman's house, who I'd worked with in Gaza, blew it up. So I wanted to, and no one in the press was challenging what was happening. And I saw Sam and he said, don't sit near me, get away from me. If you're near me, they will not call on you. And I said, actually, what they're doing, what I've been noticing they've been doing to you is they call on the guys, or maybe Sam said this, they call on the person sitting right next to you in order to kind of make you feel left out. So I'm going to sit right next to you. So I sat next to Sam, and Matthew Miller, who had later become known as Smirkula, for his condescending, smirking attitude towards any dissent, called on me, and I was able to ask my first and last dissenting question of Matthew Miller, where I presented the litany of statements expressing genocidal intent by top Israeli leaders, including Benjamin Netanyahu. And I said, what are you going to do about this? And he started basically shouting at me, telling me like what I was saying was absolutely inappropriate and out of line. Sam interjected and he said, so baby killing is not a problem? You have no problem with baby killing, bombing babies? And Matthew Miller just lost it on Sam. So I was never going to get called on after that point. I would go into the briefing room only when the other guy, Vedant Patel, would be up there, because I could like actually kind of like force my way in, and he would respond to force much more than Matthew Miller. Like I would interject and he'd let me keep going and then answer my question. So I got in a few more questions after that. But my point is that when Sam Husseini attempted to ask his question of Tony Blinken in the final press briefing of Tony Blinken told him, respect the process. Which was so, you could write a book or do a documentary called Respect the Process about Tony Blinken's State Department, obviously rich with irony. But we had respected the process up until that point, and we had been boycotted and blacklisted by Matthew Miller, who functioned kind of like Bartok to Rasputin, with Blinken as Rasputin. And it was when Sam tried to get in a question out of turn to Blinken, because he knew he would never be called on, Matthew Miller then summoned 3 cops to physically remove him and basically physically muzzle him, which obviously blew up in their faces. But for me as well, I knew there was never going to be any opportunity for me to ask a question of Tony Blinken. And there were many questions that other reporters would not ask him. And the entire way the briefing room functioned was completely controlled. And it wasn't just controlled through force or coercion. It was controlled through collaboration and the collusion of the Washington press corps. Now, for those of you who don't know, the State Department briefing rooms divided up into 2 sections. In the first 2 sections, and I wish Saeed Erekat were here, he was the only reporter in the bullpen who was consistently asking really tough questions. And it's called the bullpen. It's the first 2 sections, reserved for the legacy press, the credentialed media, the ones who actually know that they could face serious penalties with their employers if they go too far. Except for Saeed, because he works for a Palestinian news service. And they all get offices, which are basically, they get cubicles, which are basically paid for by the US government, which is kind of a form of collusion, in a room just down the hallway. It's like, the State Department press room, and everybody hangs out in there. And I went to the final press briefing of Matthew Miller the day the ceasefire was announced. This is the day before Blinken's press conference, and there was some buzz. Blinken might be showing up. What's going to happen? And I said, I'm going to behave myself. I'm going to respect the process because Blinken might show up at any point. And I'd been playing out in my mind for months as I woke up every day and watched and just opened my phone and saw images of shredded children, how I would confront Tony Blinken and what I would ask him. So Matthew Miller really provoked me with what he was saying, because he gave his analysis of the ceasefire. In every instance, Hamas was obstructing the ceasefire. In every instance, it was Hamas that refused to negotiate. They were the obstructionists. They were the rejectionists. The same mantra that we had heard from all previous administrations about the peace process that began with Madrid and Oslo. The Palestinians walked away from a fantastic deal. And we all knew this was not the case. I mean, you only needed to pay cursory attention to know that it was the Biden administration that was preventing a ceasefire. Just look at Linda Thomas Greenfield and her notorious single raised hand at the UN Security Council voting down ceasefire resolutions. Miller, at the same time, said that it wasn't possible politically to do a ceasefire because Israel was reshaping the region in a positive way, with all the damage that it was doing to Hezbollah in Lebanon, in Yemen, and he said, he actually said this, we wiped Hamas's ally off the map in Syria, suggesting some involvement there. But using that language was very provocative. And he, of course, didn't call on me. And then I learned that Matthew Miller went to drinks with pretty much most of the people in that room at a bar called Circa afterwards, just confirming to me how people were willfully managing themselves to prevent accountability that was richly deserved, not just by the specific figures, but by the State Department as an institution, which was so toxic by that point and so uniquely involved in facilitating what I consider the Holocaust of our times, but what the International Court of Justice has ruled plausibly is a genocide. They were collaborators for the most part. So it was clear to me that if Blinken showed up the following day, something had to be done out of the ordinary and the process could not be respected. So I learned from Sam 45 minutes before Blinken showed up that I had to be there. I violated a lot of traffic laws, made it there at the last second. They had the security guard at the front who writes your details as slowly as possible. And it was tense. And Blinken gets up and he says, he starts addressing the press and he starts talking about how he's forged such close friendships with them. It was shocking. And that's when I intervened. And I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, but I wanted to challenge him on two specific points. One, which I forgot to challenge him on, and another, which I think I nailed him on, that no one in the press would discuss, which I think was so salient and so relevant to why it took 15 months for a ceasefire, actually why it took us to get to why it required Donald Trump to do it. And why can't you talk about it? Because it's considered an anti-Semitic dog whistle. To talk about what Blinken said before AIPAC at a meeting in 2007, which is that his commitment, this is almost his exact words, his commitment to Israel's strength comes through his family. And he spoke about his grandfather, Maurice Blinken, who produced presided over the production of a very influential paper, research paper, demonstrating or attempting to demonstrate that historic Palestine could accommodate unlimited Jewish immigration and therefore could be colonized and provide the basis for an exclusively Jewish state. And that paper was produced in response to the British colonial white paper, which called for a limit on Jewish immigration. So it proved central to convincing the Truman administration to authorize the establishment of Israel, to make the vote at the UN. And he talked about his stepfather, who I mistakenly called his father-in-law. His father-in-law is actually Catholic. His stepfather is Samuel Pissarr, who was France, who raised Blinken in France. Blinken's not from Paris, Texas. He's not, probably knows France better than he does this country. And his stepfather was the Jewish fixer for Francois Mitterrand. He was very pro-Israel, leader of the pro-Israel community in France, and was a close, also operative and fixer working with the English businessman who was a Mossad agent, Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, the girlfriend of purported Mossad agent Jeffrey Epstein. The last person that Robert Maxwell called before he fell off his yacht mysteriously in the Mediterranean was Samuel Pissarr. So it's Blinken who broadcasts his family's relationship to Israel, not me, and not one reporter that I know of has asked him to his face, is this what influenced you to take the Israeli line every single time there was an important decision to make, whether it was to authorize arms deals to Israel or in dealing with humanitarian convoys, in secretly allowing Israel to attack police escorts of these humanitarian convoys simply because they were associated with Hamas, which is a violation of international and US law, something that Blinken did. Why did you ignore your staff at the State Department when they brought you not just like indisputable evidence of Israel deliberately killing children and aid workers and average civilians with US weapons that you authorized? Why did you do that? Why were this is described, this has all come out in the last few days because of the cowardice of our press. The New York Times finally did a piece on Tony Blinken where they called him Secretary of War, prominently mentioning the many interruptions that he received in his last two public appearances. And I believe if were it not for those interruptions from activists in DC, as well as me and Sam, that article would have never been written. And a State Department former official was quoted saying, at every point, Blinken took Israel's side and did not advance American interests. Why? Why? I think that there is a passionate attachment there that transcends the usual the usual adherence to Israeli dictates that we would see from someone like Marco Rubio, even. And it was so I wanted to put that out there. I wanted to I wanted to prevent him from taking a victory lap. I needed to get closure, and that was also just for everybody that couldn't be there. All the journalists who had been killed thanks to that soft-handed criminal, all the journalists who had been killed in Gaza as Israel killed the messenger. I felt the responsibility to do it for them because they couldn't be in that room, and for all of you who didn't have credentials, because I just felt like it was speaking on behalf of so many people. And that was the message I received afterwards from people that I knew 20 years ago who I hadn't heard from, who have nothing to do with politics, who saw this, to the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, who reached out to me to thank me. And what it says is that the policy, the Biden administration's policy on Gaza, had become globally detestable, and that even the mainstream in the United States was disgusted with it. And never before have we had a Secretary of State in my lifetime so closely identified with such a criminal policy. There will not be accountability, I don't believe, at The Hague for someone like Tony Blinken. We have nuclear weapons. We have a Storm the Hague law. But preventing someone from being able to peacefully walk down the street is a form of accountability too. And that might be the best thing that we can do for now. I think I could talk more about the ceasefire during Q&A and leave some of the analysis or much of the analysis to Helena for now. But we would not be here. I do not believe we would be here if it were not for Donald Trump. And it feels kind of crazy to say that, but Ian Bremmer, someone who's pretty much on the other side of me on every piece of geopolitical analysis, who really represents the transatlanticist, imperialist point of view, said that his takeaway from Davos was that there would not be a ceasefire if Kamala Harris had won. And so I think that also is a tribute to the activist community that refused to fall for the gaslighting and the psychological trickery and bamboozling and hoodwinking of the Democratic Party. And Donald Trump saw that. It was purely opportunistic for Donald Trump. However, that does not mean that Palestinians in historic Palestine are safe from Israeli violence. Donald Trump has clearly handed the Israeli military the West Bank and given them a free hand to, especially in the north, where they're mounting a major campaign named after the essay by Zev Jabotinsky that really is the ideological lodestar for Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel's ruling Likud party. The Iron Wall, Operation Iron Wall, to crush Palestinian resistance in the north. Trump's, in one of his first actions, has reversed sanctions on a handful of fanatical, violent settlers that were sanctioned, some of the few people that were sanctioned under Blinken. Remember, he remediated the Netzah Yehuda battalion of religious nationalists and ultra-Orthodox, very violent soldiers after some backdoor negotiation with Netanyahu. They were all sentenced to 2 weeks of human rights training before being sent back in the field to slaughter. But he did this handful of settlers, and the message that Trump is sending is the settlers in the West Bank, the religious nationalist movement, you may not have gotten your settlements in the north of Gaza that you wanted. The north of Gaza, people are going to be able to go home for now, but we're going to give you the West Bank. And so the war continues through other means. The West Bank is being Gazified before our eyes. We're seeing Israel use F-16s, F-15s in the West Bank. So the work here continues. But I think that we are going to, with the Trump administration, while we will see continued horrific violence, and Miriam Adelson be able to enact her agenda, one of the key donors, both of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, who was granted a better seat at Donald Trump's inauguration than all members of Congress and most cabinet secretaries. While we will see that, we're also going to see the mask lift in a new way. And it's going to be very damaging for the Israel lobby's bipartisan control. And its soft power is going to loosen even further. And I think that really emphasizes the importance that all of you will continue to play as educators, as activists, and as people actually doing real work on the ground.
Thank you very much, Max, for your reflections and also for being one of the very few journalists in the United States here who are taking the mantra of journalism and holding politicians accountable for their acts, speeches, and doings. Of course, I'd wanted to save this until the very end, but since this has been brought up twice now, I would love to announce that in the future, in March, we're going to be hosting a book launch for Professor Brian Barber's No Way Forward But Forward. So please be on the lookout for that. We'll announce it, and I'm honored to announce that this will be a partnership with our neighboring organization, the Institute for Palestine Studies. So we very much look forward to that. And lastly, I'd love to introduce to you today Professor Helena Cobban, who will offer some reflections on the wider geopolitical context surrounding the ceasefire, as well as Israel's regional war of aggression in the region and the implications that this deal has had for the Arab world and beyond. Now, Professor Helena is going to show us, present a copy of her new book, and we hope in the future to do a book launch for her. But we're also most fortunate to have another dear friend of the Palestine Center who's been involved with us here for at least 25 years that I'm aware of. So we're so grateful and honored to have you again. Helena Cobban is a writer and researcher on international affairs who lives in Washington, D.C. In 1984, Cambridge University Press published her seminal study, The Palestinian Liberation Organization. 3 of her 6 other sole-authored books dealt with the political and strategic developments in the Arab-Israeli theater, the rest with more global matters. For 17 years, she contributed a regular column on global issues to the Christian Science Monitor and Al Hayat in London. In 2010, she founded Just World Books, which has published groundbreaking titles by Palestinians, Zionism Questioning Jewish, and other authors. And in 2016, she was a co-founder of Just World Educational, which she now serves as president. Her main writing platform is globalites.org. So once again, please allow me in welcoming Helena Cobban. Thank you.
Thank you, Fadi, and congratulations on taking over here at this venerable Washington, D.C. institution. I'm looking forward to seeing it blossom under your leadership because your voice is sorely needed here. And it's nice to be so close to the State Department, no? It means that Saeed Arakat can come. He should be here today. But I'm really deeply moved to be sitting here with Hani Almadhoun and with Max Blumenthal and with all of you who've turned out today and all of you online. I have no idea how many people are online, but it's a lovely audience here. So I've obviously done a lot of work on the ongoing genocide in Gaza for the last 15 months, writing about it. Actually, my writing platform is called Globalities. It's a little unusual as a name. And then working with my friend Rami Khouri and with other people to produce this book, which has a lovely blurb on the front cover from Max Blumenthal. So obviously it's a good book, right?
Yes.
And it's been such a wrenching, emotional experience. I've done regular episodes of our Palcast podcast with my good friend, Dr. Yusuf Al-Jamal, who's a Gaza Palestinian, and he's brought on to our podcast so many people from Gaza, some of them still in Gaza, but some of them in Gaza's very extensive and extremely talented diaspora. I mean, really, you know, you can tell the quality of the stress that Gaza Palestinians put on education when you see what they achieve both inside Gaza and worldwide. And a lot of that is due to UNRWA. Just needs saying, you know, because UNRWA has kept alive that sense of Palestinianness, that sense of focus on rights and on community. So when we got the ceasefire on Sunday, was, as we know, the result of an unbelievably long and unnecessary negotiation that could, as the foreign minister of Qatar said, could have been concluded 13 months earlier. So that is 13 months of ongoing genocide that was enabled and encouraged and participated in by our government using our tax dollars. So the resistance in Gaza was not crushed. It was far from crushed. Do you remember how many times they told us that we have to eliminate Hamas, we have to destroy it? And oh, by the way, we've destroyed 12 battalions in the north, or 3 battalions in the middle, and it's just like the Vietnam War, and giving your kill ratios. But Hamas is smart, dedicated. As far as I can see from looking at the videos that John Elmer shares every week on Electronic Intifada, they are extremely ethical in the way that they fight. One of the things John Elmer makes a point of noting is that, when you've got your small Hamas, and this is not just Hamas fighting in Gaza, obviously, it's also the other resistance organizations that are all part of the Joint Operations Room. So that is the Abu Ali Mustafa brigades of the PFLP, and Sarai al-Quds of Islamic Jihad, and some Al-Aqsa Martyr brigades from Fatah. But it's a joint resistance. And all of them have this ethos that when the Israelis, when they manage using their very smart guerrilla operations to kill Israelis or disable their tanks, and the Israelis send in medivacs, that they don't shoot at them. And you can see that week after week. Just contrast that with the way that the Israeli military treats Palestinian ambulances and medivacs. So I think the fact that we have a ceasefire, we need to say that it's a ceasefire thanks to the resilience and the competence of the resistance of Gaza. And that is not just the military resistance, but it's also the political grassroots organizing, the very strong community organizing. I know that Hani tells us, and he's quite right, that all of this thing with the Gaza Soup Kitchen and the many other wonderful community operations, they are not political, but they are part of the resistance in a very important way. So I think that we need to recognize that sense of an intact human community, an intact human society, has not been destroyed. And that is an amazing feat after everything the people of Gaza have gone through over the past 15 months. Just the way when you see them helping each other, setting up little schoolrooms where they can, helping the old people climb across the rubble, digging desperately with their hands to get people out of the rubble. This is not a broken society. And I think it's important to recognize that. And then, of course, when Hamas, when the leadership, the national leadership outside in Qatar finalized the deal last week, we saw the discipline with which everybody went to Saraya Square on Sunday, flocking to Saraya Square in Gaza City, and Hamas fighters came out with the 3 women soldier captives and handed them over in very good order. So, this is discipline. This is a community, a society that is intact. And if they are intact after everything they've gone through, you better believe they have strengths that we in our society here can only dream of. So I'm going to talk quickly about the region-wide and global, some of the region-wide and global implications. I don't know how I'm going to do this in 15 minutes, but I'll talk very fast, okay? It's like giving the weather report or something. So it's true that the situation of the region-wide axis of resistance has been badly damaged by the attacks, the gruesome attacks that the Israeli military has launched not only against Hamas in Gaza and the resistance in Gaza, but also against the resistance in the West Bank, and crucially against the resistance in Lebanon, led by Hezbollah, but with other parties involved there as well, and the attacks the Israelis have tried to launch against Ansar Allah, the Houthis in Yemen. And we honestly have almost no idea how many Yemeni people have been killed and damaged in Israel's attacks on Yemen, but clearly a lot. And our own military has been attacking all kinds of facilities in Yemen. And the Houthis have carried on. In fact, they were sending missiles against downtown Tel Aviv or close to downtown Tel Aviv until roughly a week ago. But they have always said that that is in support of the Gaza ceasefire. And as soon as you got the Gaza ceasefire, the missiles stopped. And I actually follow a lot of international shipping sites. They're all like, wow, it's really worked. Should we start shipping through the Suez Canal again? No, it's a little bit early, because we need to see if the ceasefire is going to hold. So actually, the Houthis have a form of leverage against the international economy that is little understood in this country, but it's real. Because if you look at the costs of shipping stuff all around the Cape of Good Hope, it's massive. So, and obviously the government of Egypt is very eager to see Suez Canal being opened again for all shipping, because that's a huge portion of their governmental revenues. So the Egyptians are going to be very serious about having this ceasefire hold. Anyway, I was saying that the axis of resistance has been weakened at the regional level, but it's still there because we still have the Houthis completely unbeaten. We have the Lebanese resistance, which is in its own ceasefire, but that ceasefire is scheduled to stop on the 26th. And it's an interesting question, what will happen if the Israelis continue the violations that they have continued ever since the ceasefire was concluded in late November. But also they're supposed to get out of Lebanon physically by January 26th. So this ceasefire, both of these ceasefires have an interesting structure from my point of view. Usually in international conflicts, it is the UN that is responsible for monitoring a ceasefire. In West Asia / Middle East / North Africa, the United States likes to take control, in case you hadn't noticed. So when they concluded the Egyptian-Israeli peace agreement, they had a US-led multinational force, not a UN force. In Lebanon, there is a UN force, UNIFIL, and in Gaza and Palestine, there is a sort of a UN thing called UNTSO, which has some truce supervision responsibilities. But the Americans want to dominate and monopolize the ceasefire monitoring operations. So in Lebanon, they put in this thing called a monitoring mechanism alongside the UN force UNIFIL, and the monitoring mechanism is the US and France. And then in Gaza, we have a monitoring mechanism, allegedly, well, it is a monitoring mechanism to some extent, which is the US, Egypt, and Qatar. So in both of those setups, you have a US-led monitoring mechanism that also includes close US allies. And in case you didn't know that Qatar is a close US ally, they are actually the hosts to the biggest US military base in the whole of West Asia, the Al Ubaid base. Qatar is a very politically interesting, strategically interesting place. Let's just leave it at that. So we can definitely expect that Israeli violations of these two ceasefires will continue, both in Lebanon and in Gaza. So then what happens to Washington's relationship with, on the one hand, France in Lebanon? Are they going to have disagreements about how we deal with the Israeli violations after January 26th? And in the case of Gaza, as the violations continue, will the United States have problems with Qatar and Egypt? We don't know. There are so many unknowns. But I think that, that it's good to look at those specific kind of relationships in a context in which, especially, Donald Trump has just fired just about everybody in the State Department who knows anything about West Asia, which may not be the worst thing given the kind of people that Biden had in there and Blinken, and the fact that, some very, very good people felt they had no choice except to resign from the State Department under Blinken. And I think it's really interesting what Max was saying about Trump possibly being, we can't say better than Biden on Palestine, different, definitely. And one of the fascinating things, first of all, it's clear that it was Trump's guy, Steve Witkoff, who nailed the ceasefire, that Blinken and Brett McGurk were very eager not to nail down for the last 13 months. I don't know why Steve Witkoff did it. I'm sure that he and Trump must have agreed that he would do it, because perhaps Trump would see it as a little bit politically risky thing to do. But we've got this initial 6-week period during which the terms of the follow-on 6-week period will be negotiated. And it will be fascinating to see what happens. I have a suspicion that Trump may want to, at some gut level, withdraw from the whole of the East Atlantic, Eurasia field. I mean, I don't think he cares very much about the Europeans. I think he will do a deal on Ukraine fairly soon. And it may be that he doesn't actually care that much about Miriam Adelson now that, he's not going to be running for re-election again. Why does he need her money? Who knows? There are indeed so many unknowns here. Just before I go on, I want to note that the West Bank is a serious issue, obviously. We all know this Gazification of Jenin. And I hope that here in the Palestine Center, there will be a lot more focus on what's happening in the West Bank as well as in Gaza. But just looking at the global effects of everything that's happened in the past 15 months, I think it's indisputable that this live-streamed genocide in Gaza has spoken to people worldwide in a way that nothing the Palestinians have done as far as I know, has ever spoken so powerfully, so directly to a global public. The live stream aspect of this is so painful for everybody in this room, but it's also a wake-up call to people who have not paid attention to Israel, to Zionism, to settler colonialism and its long history. I mean, actually what the Israelis have been doing in Gaza is not that different from what George Washington's, at one point, favorite general, Mad Anthony Wayne, did against the Native Americans in the Ohio Valley. But Mad Anthony Wayne did not take, webcams and have his people live stream what they were doing to the Native Americans I have no idea these gleeful Israeli genocidaires who share their atrocities as though it's some kind of a drinking game. They're doing it for their buddies back home, or as a way to get some kind of like hot sexual encounter with an adoring woman back home. I don't know why they share this stuff. The Nazis had some degree of shame, modesty, or secrecy by building large walls around their concentration camps. And here are these current genocidaires broadcasting their actions to the whole world. And the whole world is seeing it. And since most people in the world today come from heritage which is not white European, but which was actually the subject of imperialism and settler colonialism by white Europeans historically, that is why what's happening in Gaza today has sparked this worldwide, I don't have a word for it. Intifada is not right because it's not a unified thing, but it's just a sense of horror and solidarity with the Palestinians. I mean, I do have this publishing company that publishes these wonderful books by Gaza Palestinian authors. I'm getting offers from publishers in Japan, in Pakistan, in Colombia. They want to buy the rights to our books. They want to learn. I mean, it's a most amazing time for Gaza and Palestine to be able to speak to the world, and it's changing the world. Even if this ceasefire fails, and I hope it doesn't, the resilience and resistance of the Gaza people has changed the world already. But I think it will, I'm hoping if it does succeed, this ceasefire will lead not just to a cessation of the immediate hostilities, but to rolling back the occupation of Gaza and rolling back the settler colonial project in Palestine in general. So Gaza has always been the crucible for the Palestinian rights movement. It was the crucible in 1948 and 49, right after the Nakba, during the Nakba. It's the place that contains, it's the place in Palestine that contains the highest population of refugee Palestinians. And it still does. So I'm not sure how I'm going to bring this to a close, except to say that there are both huge challenges, and we know the challenges. We know the challenges, but I think there are opportunities. And one of the opportunities is with the rebuilding project. This rebuilding project cannot be like the last 5, since 2009, 2012, 2014, 2000, whatever. On all of those previous occasions, the Israelis would mow the lawn, as they said. They would destroy large chunks of things in Gaza and in the West Bank. And then there would be a ceasefire, and then the rebuilding would take place under the control of the Israelis, because Gaza is a captive economy as well as a captive society. So the rebuilding would all be done by trucking stuff in through Israel, using Israeli subcontractors and trucking companies and customs clearance people. It was a massive profit center for huge sections of the Israeli economy. It's kind of the classical Keynesian scheme. You destroy Gaza and then you rebuild Gaza. So you make money going in and you make money going out. What's not to like? This time it has to be different. This time the international community has to say, Israel cannot control the rebuilding of these mausoleums, these human remains mixed with rubble, mixed with children's toys. Israel did this. Israel cannot control the undoing of it. So that's one of the things that I think is an opportunity for the global majority. And I think that as many of us in this country as can press for, essentially what I'm saying is the end of Israel's control of Gaza, the end of Israel's occupation of Gaza, and then the progressive rolling back of the settler colonial project. Let's hope it starts.
Thank you so much, Professor Helena, for your words of optimism, and also for reminding us all that we cannot go back to the status quo ante after this. So in the interest of time, we'll be moving straight to Q&A. We have our wonderful intern in the back who has a microphone. Should anybody wish to ask a question, please raise your hand. We'll be taking, should we take like 2 or 3 questions at a time? Is everyone okay with that? In groups, and then at the end we'll hopefully have a question or 2 from our live streamed audience, who we thank you so much for joining. And by the way, our beloved Saeed Arakat couldn't be with us today for a brief family situation, but we miss you and hope you're watching us today. He would have otherwise moderated the Q&A, which we would have loved to, but we know that he'll be with us in all of our other events. So yeah, without further ado, please keep your questions short to allow as many guests as possible the opportunity to ask, and we'll thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you. Technology is a mystery to me. So I was wondering if anyone could comment on a comment that a friend gave to me. I asked him, he's a friend from South Lebanon, and I asked him why it was that he thought that the Trump's envoy tried to, made it a point to nail down the ceasefire. And he said that the reason he thought that had happened was that basically Trump wanted to get back to resuscitating the Abraham Accords, which of course did not stop October the 7th. But that he apparently hopes can be revitalized. What do members of the panel and maybe others think about this?
Who wants to start? Well, that's the ultimate objective for any administration. And that's why one major reason why October 7th happened was the Abraham Accords. The way they're structured is to disappear the Palestinians from history and the Palestinian struggle through a peace of the rich with these retrograde Gulf monarchies making peace without any consent of their population with Israel. And then the US administration tells the world, we made peace between the Jews and the Arabs and it's all over. Everybody's happy. Who are these crazy people in Gaza who are getting all mad? They're just trying to ruin our party. They're against peace. And Jared Kushner and the Trump gang will tap into the sovereign wealth funds of the UAE, Saudi Arabia. Qatar was obviously opposed to this because they were left out. They have their own objectives. It was launched by the Trump administration. Blinken and Jake Sullivan were pushing this. That's why Jake Sullivan said we've had the quietest Middle East ever, and a week before October 7th. And that's where they're heading. It's why the Biden administration postponed and sabotaged and kneecapped the ceasefire for so long, was so that Israel could do as much damage as possible to the resistance axis, because they were the main force standing in the way of this regional integration, this dystopian regional integration. It's going to be a long, hard slog for them to get back to the Abraham Accords after October 7th. And it's not just because of the axis of resistance. It's because of the populations in their own countries opposing such a deal. But that is one reason why Trump wanted to end this. He promised voters that he would end it as well. And I got to say, he's been much better than Democrats at making good on his promises. Whether they're the crazy promises or the good promises. He let Ross Ulbricht out. I mean, I never thought that was going to happen, but he promised the Libertarian Party that he would let the founder of the Silk Road out at their convention, and he did so. He promised in Michigan when he went there to destroy Kamala's ambitions because she was just so disrespectful and so condescending of Arab Americans and Muslim Americans. He just capitalized on the opportunity and said, I'm going to make a deal. And who did he appoint as his envoy, who's now, I think, emerging as the Iran envoy? Steve Witkoff. Yes, he's Jewish. He's probably pro-Israel on some level. He's not some think tank guy from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies who spent his whole career cozying up to Israeli officials. He's Trump's golf buddy. And actually, AIPAC is pretty upset with his presence. So we're still all, I think, would you say we don't really know where Trump's going to go with this? Whereas with I think a Kamala administration would be much more clear.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Do you think there's any doubt that Israel is going to annex the West Bank in the coming few years?
Honey?
Oh.
I think Israel is going to annex the West Bank. I'm just not sure what Israel will be or how long such a move will last. I mean, we do have pushback, major pushback from the United Nations and from the International Court of Justice. Now, I know all of these are like big, airy-fairy institutions, but there's some serious forces in the world that still hang on to international law. And of course, Trump can support all kinds of things, like he supported the annexation of Jerusalem and of the Golan. And Biden did nothing to rescind either of those completely illegal acts, which he could have done on day one, should have done on day one. So what difference does it make to international law that, you know, country X annexes a part of another country? It does make a difference. And there are new forces in the world, the global majority, that will come together and protect the sovereign inviolability of countries. But it's going to take time. I mean, unfortunately, I had hoped that the Gaza shock to the international system would have rallied the other powers in the international system much faster than it has, because one of my like historical analogies that I was going with from growing up in England during the 1950s was how, you know, when the British and French and Israelis invaded Egypt with the goal of overthrowing Nasser, that Dwight Eisenhower immediately struck back, not in military ways, but by pulling the plug on the British pound. And he forced Anthony Eden and Guy Mollet in France to back down very speedily. So I had hoped that the global majority would mobilize and use economic power to force the US-Israeli assault against Gaza to end. But I guess the international economy is not yet strong enough for that to happen, although the non-American portions of the international economy continue to grow stronger and stronger. So, you know, maybe it'll be in 5 years, 10 years.
It'll be a nice mask lifting moment. I mean, essentially the West Bank is under Israeli control or under the control of its subcontractors in the PA. And in the north, you have resistance brewing, thanks to the ability to get arms through Jordan. And what will happen if Donald Trump takes Greenland? It will take it from a NATO member state, and it will expose what NATO truly is, which is a US-directed, US-controlled military alliance. It will show how subservient Europe is. Denmark will be able to do nothing. $1 trillion of resources will have been stolen from it. And Israel will annex, if Israel annexes the West Bank, well, there goes the whole farce of the two-state solution. There goes the peace process. Israel has responsibility for everyone living there, and they won't provide for them. So there goes the whole farce of Israel and international law, if there ever had been one. It's apartheid on steroids, and there's no denying it's apartheid, because according to the census, there are more Palestinians between the river and the sea than there are Jewish Israelis. So it's just officially apartheid, and that will have major implications in international law. I mean, that was what the whole Gaza disengagement was about, is like, we're not going to actually include them. They'll eventually be absorbed into Egypt, or they'll have their own parastate, but we're not going to we're not going to include that part of the population, and then we'll resolve this demographic problem that we have by putting them behind walls forever. And October 7th exploded that. Now there's going to have to be, according to Netanyahu and the military intelligence apparatus, some kind of permanent Israeli military presence inside Gaza. Remember that talking point that we heard for the last 20 years? Israel left Gaza. There's no occupation there. What are they so mad about? Well, that's gone, because they want to be in the Philadelphia corridor, and they have this de facto military base cutting Gaza, the north from the rest of Gaza, the Netzarim corridor, and now they're moving American security contractors into there, according to the New York Times, to prevent Palestinians returning home from the displacement camps to the north from bringing weapons with them. So they're going to have American mercenaries rousting Palestinians and taking their biometric data. I mean, yes, it's horrible, but it also just destroys Israel's claim to not be completely controlling those people down to their genetic, like DNA level. And the implications are extreme for Israel's image. And we're also seeing a process inside Israel of, like, I don't know how to say it, like fascistization. The chief of staff, the Israeli army has quit, Halevi. He will be replaced by someone more extreme. Right below him, the head of the Southern Command in the Israeli military has quit. We don't know why he quit. Halevi quit because of October 7th. There's going to be these positions will likely be filled by extreme religious nationalists. But Bezalel Smotrich is still the finance minister. He didn't quit like Ben-Gvir, but he's there to make sure that this process of colonization in the West Bank continues. And so the mask is off in so many ways. And what will happen to Al-Aqsa as well? I mean, the temple movement that wants to build a third temple in Israel is incipient. They're gaining more power than ever. So any victory that they win for themselves is Pyrrhic on the international stage.
We have one more question from two more questions from the audience, and then I'm going to ask three brief questions from online.
Now that Trump has forced Netanyahu into a ceasefire thing, is it true? Because I think I heard something that he's also pushing him to, with some kind of ultimatum, pushing Netanyahu to pull out of southern Lebanon by Sunday. Is that true?
Just in 5 seconds, I heard that Netanyahu is demanding 5 de facto military bases from Trump in southern Lebanon as a condition for withdrawal.
Yeah, I had a question for Hani. If you could talk a little bit more about the mental health situation for children, specifically like what organizations that have existed before the ceasefire, and if there's any talk about something within UNRWA to address child mental health.
Yeah, that's a big issue. Obviously, all of us adults been traumatized watching the news. Imagine the kids inside Gaza. It's real. There are a lot more, mental issues that are at play. Unfortunately, there is some stigma going on, but this is such a large scale that people are getting some support. I know that UNRWA, for example, is making that a priority. That's why they launched the Back to Learning, which is basically a program for kids to be together. They're not supposed to say back to school because the schools are gone. So they're doing a lot with that, the mental health counseling. In fact, in addition to the children, there is also mental health counseling for families where, gender-based violence. There is, you could understand the pressure and the tension causes that, but it's a big program of UNRWA's. In fact, the reason why we do the Gaza 5Ks around the country, the UNRWA USA, is because we support mental health counseling. But to be frank, the priority is to get people food. You got people who don't have food and water, but I know there is smaller initiative to do like a little playground here, playground there, but you can't, like, drone is flying 24/7 and all that, bombs, and it's a lot. And the trauma of not going to school for about second year now, it's a problem. There is a lot of compound issues. Obviously, there was a lot more mental health counseling, but the better good news about this is you don't need a truck to bring mental health help, right? So the counselors are there. They're also traumatized. You could do better if you bring toys, you could bring crayons and things like that. There's a lot of artwork therapy going on in Gaza. I am aware of smaller initiatives here and there. My niece runs a program like that, and it's not sustainable. You're in a tent in the middle of nowhere. But ultimately, that's a big priority for UNRWA and a lot of the partners. Oftentimes, the donors to emerge for specific mental health programs, like Japan, makes that a priority. And it's a lot of steps to do, but meanwhile, we want to make sure kids have food and medicine. That's the top thing. You've got so many amputees. There's a lot of things we're unpacking. Imagine my nieces, Chef Mahmoud's kids. They're wondering about, like, hey, when is my dad gonna come back? They're kids, they're 4 years old. And she said, oh, they said he's buried. They say, oh, can we get, like, there's a lot of things that people are still processing through. Even my mom, I don't think she's the same, they have not good nutrition in a while. They just had chicken for the first time in 15 months. So a lot of that we're unpacking, and there's going to be tension too within Gaza. There's dynamics of who's to blame. Israel did this, but let's talk about what would the future look like. So there's a lot of passion. We have a Palestinian group in the US for Palestinian Americans, and often there is these debates about X, Y, and Z, and it's just mostly entrenched in the political side. Whereas when we think that, as Palestinians, we have to really offer support, and that's really what grounded me personally. I would have been just losing my over the life in Gaza had I not been. Every morning I get pictures of kids. Some of you know Hamoudi from Instagram. So a lot of kids were trying to do these things, and some of them don't have shoes, and it's a lot. But stay tuned. There's a lot more updates on that. But for now, I'm hopeful that kids will be alive for as long as it takes, and we're not out of the danger zone. People gonna go back on Sunday. Guess what they're gonna find in their homes? Some wires and bombs and things like that. And UNRWA was really doing an education campaign around like, hey, do not touch, and also the Palestinian Civil Defense Force. So yeah, I hope that gives you some clues. Thanks.
Very briefly, because we don't want to keep you here for much longer. We have 3 small questions from our members of the audience online. The first one, to the speakers, is there truth to what's been reported that Netanyahu has given promises or commitments to come to terms with the ceasefire agreement? The second one is, could one of the panelists please speak to the role of the PA in the post-ceasefire era? And lastly, the third question is, the reconstruction of Gaza will be the biggest from any of the past wars. Who do you think will govern Gaza and oversee this process?
Can I take a couple of quick ones quickly? So, as a Palestinian from Gaza, I feel the PA let us down in the sense that they could have. I was begging people in the PA to show up in Rafah, to show up in Gaza, to show some empathy, or for the Palestinians who are like, we're supposed to be led by these people. And no little luck. Maybe we've gotten the Minister of Health to go, and that's because she's a woman and she managed to do this. The other guys wouldn't go. And they're just been very unhelpful. And obviously, there is a lot of criticism on the other side, but that's one. It doesn't seem a lot of people are taking the PA seriously. Obviously, this is my personal view. Even in conversations, they were asked to present a plan for Gaza post genocide, and it wasn't impressive. It was short in details. So it's unfortunate who's unclear. Just about the next day, the collective of Palestinian Americans put together a proposal, and we'll share it out in the media maybe tomorrow, about sort of a vision from within Palestinians who are not really ideologue, who are not like Fatah, Hamas. So hopefully that will start the conversation. It has really some good ideas, new ideas, old ones, but at the end of the day, this moves us away from the PA and Hamas and all these things. Hopefully we'll circulate that soon and start the conversation. But we are definitely, there is no shortage of leaders, but not very good ones at this point. So thanks.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear about the planning from your Palestinian American group. What's the name of the group so I can follow you?
I'll send it to you. Are we
Okay.
WhatsApp? We'll circulate it. I just wanted to get more people to endorse it.
No, that's wonderful
Yeah.
because I mean, I think one thing that a lot of people in the West don't know or don't remember or don't understand is that Palestinians actually know a lot about urban planning, architecture, like basic infrastructure. Who do you think actually built most of those city-states down in the Gulf? It was actually Palestinians and some Egyptians. So you have, in your amazing human resource base, all the capabilities. You just need obviously some formula for bringing it all together and rebuilding Gaza. But it has to be thought of, I think, in a number of different phases. The most immediate one is shelter. Like, are they actually getting tents and large tents and what are they getting in?
Yeah, so the tents, I was reading a report among the hundreds of trucks on the road, there is a lot of tents. But what people are looking for is the caravan or the temporary homes or the trailer park. There's a lot of those are coming. There is a promise of 50,000 of those, and people will, there is already lists for people to sign up for that. Tents, they've been living in tents for the longest time, but I just do want to say something before. Let me just, I think there's some good ideas by Americans like you who live here, who have families in Gaza. They've been genocided and they got sick of watching politicians speak for us when they're not actually paying for what's happening. They're isolated from these decisions. So hopefully I'll circulate it at some point. We just wanted to get our community, the 500 so Palestinian American thought leaders who have family in Gaza to weigh in. So
Just on the day after, I mean, look at what happens in our own cities and our own country when there's a disaster. That's the US plan for Gaza. I mean, it's here it's gentrification, corporatization. It doesn't benefit the people who are affected. Disaster capitalism, vulture capitalism, BlackRock. I mean, go look at the Ukrainian embassy. There you have like a willing prostitute for American corporate interests, which is something that you will not find among the leadership in the Gaza Strip. It says, we are open for business. And it's basically, BlackRock, come take all of our assets, do what you did to Russia in the 1990s. We're
That's
all yours.
kind of what Ahmed Shara is promising for Syria now.
Exactly. I mean, that's why Ahmed Shara, who's, Mohammed Jelani with a suit, sent his foreign minister to Davos to cater to Tony Blair and the international predatory elite. I mean, Zelensky gave a very revealing interview to Lex Friedman where he cursed and he spoke in English. He's trying to be a podcast bro. And at one point he starts lacerating the Biden administration and said, you gave us $175 billion of our money and only half of it showed up. Where did the rest of it go? Well, it went to contractors who saw a disaster and wanted to get in on the money. So that's what Gaza is for this firm that I mentioned that's going in there to screen Palestinians going north to the Netzarim corridor, but so many more vultures will try to come in. And it's why you saw a show of strength from Hamas and their Nukhba force in Soraya Square, where they were saying, you have to deal with us. We're not trying to govern. I think on October 7th, Hamas gave up governance and said, we're going to play the role also that like Palestinian Islamic Jihad played, where we're there, we're behind the scenes, but we just do resistance and you have to deal with us. And the PA is not going to come in on the back of an Israeli tank because Palestinians won't consent. If you want to see what the kind of, this was put forward by Netanyahu, but if you want to see what the neoliberal capitalist plan for Gaza after the genocide is, Netanyahu uploaded this in Hebrew to his website. It's called Project Neom, Neom 2030. And I was too lazy to write about it. But it's a shocking plan where it shows in a PowerPoint presentation how Gaza will be transitioned from being destroyed to then being de-radicalized, then being taken over by some kind of dictatorial third party, probably the UAE, and then it will blossom into this kind of Dubai-style utopia, which, I mean, it's obviously not what they really want to do with it, but it's right there on Netanyahu's website, and it's a plan for the total destruction of the Palestinian cause, the de-Palestinianization of the area, and then the transformation into this bland kind of landscape that can easily be exploited and by international capital. And they'll finally get a port, I guess. But that's the plan. That's the Abraham Accords. And it's the plan for all of us, honestly. On that note,
just to add very quickly, like unfortunately, the news showing that Egypt is getting ready to collect some money and rebuild Gaza. I don't know if this is true or not. Knowing that the Palestinian pays $5,000 to leave Gaza to the Egyptian side doesn't give me an assurance. I hope these are all mistakes. I hope this is not the case, but it seems that there are people already to cash in on the disaster in Gaza and the suffering of my people, including my family. So please hold him accountable as much as you can and give him help.
Thank you very much to our three speakers. No, I'm going to give a much abridged closing remarks. I won't be reading it all, but I wanted to just note that while the first phase of the ceasefire holds, our thoughts and hearts go out to our brothers and sisters and family in Jenin and the rest of the West Bank who are facing siege, systematic attacks, and increasing settler violence. I wanted to just reiterate and affirm to us all that we're not here united in suffering and victimhood, but in resilience and solidarity. Over the last 15 months, we've seen global changes unreversible for the Palestinian cause. It has been brought back from the back burner to the main political discussion in every circle of political halls across the world. It has changed an entire generation of rising young Jews who refuse to have a genocide be held under their name and the beloved good faith of a Jewish religion. And it's also shattered the illusion of the myth of an indestructible, invincible colonial army in the state of Israel. So with that, I'll say that, with all the backings of all the largest imperial powers and forces in the world, the Palestinians still stay on their lands. The state of Israel has failed to eliminate and exterminate and will never be able to do so in any part of historic Palestine. So with that, I remain optimistic for the future for our peoples. Before we close, I just want to announce that in the coming months, we have a lot of wonderful events and programmings here at the Jerusalem Fund, and we'll be relaunching our Gallery of Quds in the coming months after Ramadan, so please stay tuned. Of course, we announced Professor Brian Barber's book launch, and we hope to do one for Helena Cobban as well. And for our dear guests in person, we have books at sale at front. We have a promotion, buy one, get one 50% off. We take cash and credit card. And for those who carry checks too. And at the very last thing, I want to give my heartfelt gratitude to my esteemed panelists, as well as my appreciation to my team, my Deputy Director, Dunad Abbas, who's behind the scenes operating the virtual scene, our Finance and Operations Manager, Tariq Nasser, and our wonderful interns, especially Laith Malhis, who've been my backbone these past few weeks and who've made my work a joy and a pleasure as I've settled into this new position. So one more time, please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists, and thank you all for joining us today.